Sophie was a girl who was never truly alone. Wherever she went, she had a friend who was always with her. This friend was her shadow. She had named him Shade, and he was the most faithful companion a girl could ask for. When Sophie ran through the sunny meadow, Shade ran right beside her, a silent, dark copy of her joy. When she skipped down the garden path, Shade skipped just as happily. They played the most wonderful games together. Sophie would stand in the afternoon sun and make shadow puppets on the garden wall, a graceful butterfly, a hopping rabbit, and a soaring eagle. Shade would copy her every move perfectly, the star of their little show. Sophie loved Shade with all her heart. She loved how he was long and stretched out in the morning, short and stout at noon, and long and mysterious. Again, in the evening, she would talk to him as they played, telling him all her secrets, and she felt that, in his silent, dancing way, he understood. He was her other half, her dark twin, the quiet keeper of her sunny day adventures. And Sophie believed, with the certainty that all children have for magical things, that they would be together like this, side by side, forever. But even the most faithful friend can sometimes grow restless. For years, Shade had copied Sophie's every move. He had been her echo in the light, her silent partner in every game. But he had never once gotten to choose the game himself. He had never gotten to lead the dance. One late afternoon, as the sun began to dip towards the horizon, a new feeling started to stir within him. Sophie was dancing in circles on the lawn, her arms outstretched, and Shade was dutifully spinning along with her. But he felt bored. He wanted to do something different. He tried to make his own shape, to stretch an arm out a little further, to make a funny, wobbly leg. But he couldn't. He was tied to her, a perfect, dark mirror. His blurry, soft outline seemed to droop with a sigh that no one could hear. He watched the other shadows in the garden, the long, interesting shadow of the oak tree, the complex, lacy shadow of the rosebush. They got to be still and mysterious. They had their own shapes. He longed for just a moment of freedom, a chance, to have his own adventure, to be the one who decided whether to be long or short, still or dancing. As the sun sank lower, the shadows grew longer and bolder, and the line between the world of light and the world of darkness began to blur, and in that magical, in-between time, Shade felt his connection to Sophie begin to loosen. The moment came just as the sun touched the horizon, in that magical instant known as dusk. Sophie stopped her spinning and stood still to watch the beautiful colors fill the sky. And in that moment of stillness, Shade saw his chance. The golden thread that connected them, a bond usually as strong as sunlight, became weak and thin in the twilight. With a little wiggle and a surprising pop that made no sound, Shade pulled free. For the first time ever, he was not attached to Sophie's feet. He was independent. Sophie felt a strange, sudden coldness, as if a cool breeze had just passed through her. She looked down, and her heart skipped a beat. Her feet were standing on the grass, but there was no shadow there. She spun around and saw him. Shade was a few feet away, a perfect, dark outline of her, wiggling with a newfound, joyful energy. He gave a happy little bounce, as if to say, "I'm free." And then, before Sophie could say a word, he turned and darted away, not running like a girl, but skimming silently and impossibly fast over the grass. He zipped past the bird bath, ducked under a rose bush, and disappeared into the growing darkness of the garden. Sophie stood frozen in shock, her hand outstretched. "Shade, come back," she called out. But her voice was swallowed by the evening quiet. He was gone. Her most faithful friend had run away. Tears welled up in Sophie's bright blue eyes. She felt a deep, hollow loneliness she had never felt before. The world, without her shadow, suddenly seemed too bright, too empty. She wiped her eyes, her shock turning into a determined resolve. She had to find him. But how do you look for a shadow? Her first thought was to look in the places they had loved to play. She ran to the sun-drenched garden wall where they had made shadow puppets, but the wall was just a plain, empty stone, its surface growing cool in the evening air. She looked around the sunny patches of the lawn where they had run and danced, but there was no sign of him. She checked all the bright, open, familiar places, calling his name softly into the wind. "Shade, where are you? The game is over." But the only response was the gentle chirping of the first crickets of the evening. She felt a growing sense of panic. It was as if he had vanished completely. She couldn't understand why he would leave. Had she been a bad friend? Had she not danced enough or made enough fun puppets? The world felt wrong without him, off balance. She sat down on the cool grass, the last of the sun's warmth fading from the world, and hugged her knees to her chest, feeling completely and utterly alone. As Sophie sat there, a tear rolling down her cheek, she remembered something her grandmother had told her once on a hot, sunny day. They had been watching the cool, dark shadows of the clouds drift across the fields. Her grandmother had smiled and said, "Shadows are shy, Sophie. They don't like all the bright, noisy business of the sun. They have their own quiet world. To find a shadow, you must think like a shadow." At the time, Sophie had just giggled, but now the words came back to her with a new and profound meaning. She had been looking for shade in all the wrong places. She had been looking for him in her world, the world of sunlight, of bright colors and open spaces. But shade had run away to his world, the world of darkness, of quiet, and of hidden corners. She lifted her head, her blue eyes scanning the garden with a new understanding. The sun was almost gone now, and the world was transforming. The familiar shapes of the garden were disappearing, replaced by a new landscape made entirely of deep, soft, mysterious shadows. The space beneath the porch steps, the dark patch under the thickest part of the hedge, the inky blackness between the garden shed and the fence, these were the places where shade would feel at home. She had to stop thinking like a girl looking for a lost toy and start thinking like a shadow looking for a friend. Sophie stood up and took her first tentative step into the world of shadows. She crept over to the large, leafy hosta plant by the porch. The sunlit tops of its leaves were familiar, but the world underneath them was a secret, dark green cavern. Peeking inside, she saw a tiny world of incredible beauty that she had never noticed before. A single, shy ladybug was sleeping on the underside of a leaf, and a delicate spiderweb, strung between two stems, was catching the last of the twilight and shimmering like a net of diamonds. This was Shade's world. It was not empty and scary. It was quiet, intricate, and full of its own kind of beauty. She moved to the old, stone bird bath. Its top was still bright, but its thick, round base cast a long, deep shadow on the grass. She lay on her tummy and looked into the darkness, seeing the tiny, individual blades of grass that lived their whole lives in that cool, shady spot. She began to see the world as Shade must see it, a beautiful and complex tapestry of light and dark. She realized that for a shadow, these weren't just patches of darkness. They were safe harbors, quiet roads, and secret kingdoms. She felt a new appreciation for her friend, and a deeper understanding of why he might want to explore this beautiful, silent world on his own. As Sophie moved silently through the deepening twilight, her eyes now searching the shadows instead of the light, she saw her first clue. On the dark, damp earth beneath the tall rose bushes, she saw a flicker of movement. It was a group of tiny, roly-poly bugs curled up into tight little balls. But they weren't still. They were gently rocking back and forth, as if being nudged by a playful, invisible hand. Sophie smiled. This was exactly the kind of gentle, silly game Shade would love to play. He couldn't make grand shadow puppets here, but he could make the tiniest creatures in the garden dance. She knew he had been here. She crept closer, her movements as quiet as a shadow herself. "That was a good trick, Shade," she whispered into the darkness. "But I see you." A soft rustle in the leaves a few feet away was her only answer. It was him. He was close, and he was playing with her, leading her on a chase through his own secret, shadowy world. The game of hide-and-seek had begun, but this time, the rules were different. To win, she had to follow the darkness, not the light. A thrill of excitement replaced her sadness. This wasn't just a search. It was a brand new game, a game she and Shade had never played before. The chase was on. Sophie followed the trail of playful disturbances through the garden's secret world. She saw a long, elegant fern frond swaying gently, even though there was no breeze. She knew it was Shade, brushing past it as he ran. She saw a single, perfect water droplet tremble and fall from the petal of a sleeping tulip, and she knew he had bumped the stem. It was a trail of silence and gentle mischief. She moved quietly, her feet light on the soft grass, her heart thumping with the fun of the game. She wasn't calling out for him anymore. She was playing his game by his rules. She hid behind the thick trunk of the old oak tree, just as he would, and peeked out to see where he might go next. She saw a flicker of deeper darkness move across the cobblestone path and knew he was heading for the old stone well at the back of the garden. He was leading her to all his favorite shadowy places, the places she had never noticed before. She giggled softly, a sound that was bright in the quiet of the garden. She wasn't just chasing him, she was exploring his world with him. For the first time, she was seeing the garden through his eyes, appreciating the beauty and the mystery of the places where the sun did not reach. As Shade led Sophie on this magical tour of his world, something inside him began to change. He had run away because he was bored of always following, of always being the copy. He had wanted his own adventure. But now, as Sophie followed him, not with anger or sadness, but with laughter and a playful spirit, he realized this was even better. He wasn't on an adventure by himself. He was leading his best friend on a new kind of adventure. He was the guide. He was the one showing her the secret, beautiful things hidden in the dark. As he hid in the deep, inky shadow of the old stone well, he watched her approach. She wasn't looking for him with frantic, worried eyes anymore. She was looking with curious, sparkling eyes, a happy smile on her face. She was enjoying his world. He felt a deep, warm feeling that he had never felt before. It was pride. He was proud of his world, of its quiet beauty and its secret wonders, and he was happy to be sharing it with her. The boredom he had felt was completely gone, replaced by the exciting joy of being the leader of the game. He realized he didn't need to be without her to be free. He just needed them to play together in a new way, a way where they could take turns leading the dance. Shade decided to show her his favorite place of all. He zipped away from the well and led her to the back of the garden shed. To Sophie, it had always been a dark, boring, and slightly spooky corner of the yard. But to Shade, it was a playground. The side of the shed was a tall, flat wall, and the setting moon cast the long, complex shadows of the nearby flower beds and the picket fence onto its surface. It was a giant, ever-changing canvas. As Sophie watched, Shade began to dance. He leaped into the air and merged with the shadow of a tall sunflower, suddenly becoming a towering giant with a flower for a head. Then he would slide down and blend with the shadow of the picket fence, becoming a long, stripy creature with a dozen legs. He was no longer just a copy of Sophie. He was using the other shadows of the world to become anything he wanted to be. He was an artist, and his medium was the darkness itself. Sophie watched, her eyes wide with amazement, her heart filled with admiration for her clever, creative friend. She had never known he could do such things. She applauded softly, her small claps a happy sound in the quiet night. After his grand performance, Shade gave a playful bow and then zipped away one last time. Sophie knew this was the final part of the game. She followed his fleeting movement towards the oldest and largest tree in the garden, a magnificent, ancient willow whose long, sweeping branches created a deep, dark curtain of leaves all around its trunk. This was the darkest, most secret place in the entire garden. Sophie knew that this must be his final hiding place. She approached the tree quietly. It was like standing before a great green tent. She pushed aside one of the long, leafy branches and peeked inside. In the deep, peaceful darkness under the willow tree, she saw him. He was not hiding or preparing to run again. He was sitting very still, a perfect, dark silhouette of her, waiting patiently. He had led her on a wonderful chase, shown her all the secrets of his world, and now he was waiting for her, ready for their new adventure to begin together. His playful energy had settled into a quiet, happy stillness. He had had his fun, and now he was ready to be with his friend again. He looked peaceful, content, and happy to have been found. Sophie smiled and stepped through the curtain of leaves, entering the quiet, secret world under the willow tree. She sat down on the soft grass right next to Shade. For a long moment, they just sat there together in the comfortable silence, two friends reunited. The world outside seemed far away. Sophie was no longer sad or scared, and Shade was no longer bored or restless. They were just happy to be together again. Then Sophie had an idea. She wanted to show Shade that she understood, that she wanted to play in his world, too. She turned to face the thick trunk of the willow tree. The faint moonlight filtering through the leaves created a soft, dappled light on the bark. It was a perfect stage. She raised her hands and, just as she had done in the bright sunlight, she made a shadow puppet. She made a beautiful, graceful swan. It was a gift, an apology, and an invitation, all in one. She was showing him that she could come into his world of shadows and create light and beauty there, just for him. She was no longer just the person he followed. She was a friend who wanted to play with him as an equal. As Shade watched the beautiful swan puppet that Sophie had made for him, a feeling of pure, overwhelming love and happiness filled his shadowy form. In that moment, he knew he never wanted to be apart from her again. He had had his adventure, but this being together, sharing a game, creating beauty in the darkness was so much better. He moved closer to Sophie, nudging her gently with his shadowy shoulder, and as he did, a beautiful, magical thing happened. A faint, shimmering, golden thread of light appeared from the center of Sophie's chest, and an identical thread appeared from the center of Shade's form. The two threads reached across the small gap between them, and with a soft, silent sparkle, they reconnected. The golden thread pulsed with a warm, gentle light. It was the bond between them, the magic that tied them together, and it was now visible for the first time. But it felt different now. It was no longer a tight, unbreakable tether that forced him to follow. It felt soft, flexible, and full of a warm, loving energy. It was a connection of friendship, not of rules. They were linked once more, not as a person and their copy, but as to true friends, ready to face the world together. With their friendship restored and their bond remade, Sophie and Shade stepped out from under the willow tree and back into the moonlit garden. But now, everything was different. As Sophie took a step, Shade moved with her, but he was no longer just a flat copy. He had a new playful energy. When Sophie skipped, Shade would add an extra little bounce. When Sophie twirled, Shade would make his arms extra long and wavy, adding a flourish to her spin. They began to dance together across the lawn, a new kind of dance they had never danced before. It was a dance of partnership. Sometimes Sophie would lead, and Shade would follow, and sometimes Shade would stretch in a certain direction, and Sophie would laugh and follow him, letting him lead her on a tour of the most interesting shadows. They were no longer just a girl and her shadow. They were a team. They danced and played under the light of the smiling moon, their movements a perfect, joyful harmony of light and dark. Their new game was the best one of all, a game of give and take, of listening and leading, a game of true and equal friendship. Finally, as a big yawn escaped from Sophie, she knew it was time for bed. They walked back to the house together, hand in shadow hand. When she got to her bedroom, she was no longer afraid of the dark. The shadows in her room didn't look like monsters, they looked like potential friends, like secret corners of Shade's magical world. As she climbed into bed, she looked at Shade, who was now resting peacefully on the floor beside her bed, a dark, comforting shape in the moonlight. "You won't run away again, will you?" she whispered. Shade wiggled his shadowy form and made the shape of a tiny, perfect heart on the floor, a silent promise that he would always stay. Sophie smiled. She knew he would keep his promise, and she made a promise back to him that she would always remember to play in his world, too. She would always remember the beauty of the shadows and the importance of letting her friend lead the dance sometimes. They were a team now, and they would be forever. With that happy, peaceful thought, Sophie closed her eyes, feeling safer and more loved than ever before. And so, Sophie and her shadow became true partners, dancing together in a beautiful balance of light and dark. Now, it's your turn to find a cozy, shady spot in your own dreams. Close your eyes, feel the quiet of the night, and sleep well. If you enjoyed our fable tonight, we hope you'll join us again. Please like and subscribe to Bedtime's Fable to help us share more gentle stories with the world. Sweet dreams.